بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Beloved brothers and sisters in Islam, thank you very much for joining us on this special Know Your Rights presentation. And without any further ado, I'm going to bring on my colleague, Sister Amy, a CAIR Michigan staff attorney, who will be giving you a brief presentation in regards to knowing your rights for Hujjaj, for Hajj pilgrims, and particularly traveling in regards to the famous pilgrimage that is a religious obligation for every Muslim who is able to afford it to make at least once in a lifetime. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Amy.
Assalamu alaikum, Brother Dawood. Thank you.
Okay, I will remove myself and then come back on at the end, inshallah.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Before we start with the Know Your Rights presentation, I'd like to just talk a little bit about why it's important to have this presentation for people traveling to Hajj. What we know and the statistics show that Muslims are 10 times more likely to get stopped at the border upon re-entry from overseas travel than any other demographic of U.S. citizens and visa holders. What we also know is from past experience is that when people are coming back from Hajj, this is even more likely the case. And there have been questions at the border to people returning from Hajj about religious practices and things like that. So we want to prepare our Hujjaj with the tools that they need upon reentry to make sure that they have a smooth reentry and that they know what their rights are when they're being questioned at the border. So first, I'd like to say that when you travel internationally and you come back across the U.S. border, the border itself is a place where the U.S. Constitution applies, but it doesn't really apply all of the way. You have limited rights at the border protected by the constitutions based on case law that has been interpreted to mean that there is something so special and unique about the border that there's always a threat of illegal materials or harm coming through the border, so that the United States has a right to add extra layers of protection at the border, which in turn diminishes our constitutional rights at the border. Also, the amount of rights that an individual has at the border really depends on what their legal status is in the United States. If you are a U.S. citizen, you enjoy some constitutional protections at the border. For instance, no matter what happens, you cannot be denied entry into the United States at the border if you are a U.S. citizen. But if you are a lawful permanent resident, you enjoy much, much less security with your constitutional rights at the border. And even though you have some rights, they're very much diminished. You also cannot be denied entry at the border if you are a lawful permanent resident, but things that could happen that could impact your immigration status at the border, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But if you are any other type of visa holder, if you are here on a visitor visa, if you are coming into the United States returning from Hajj and you have an H-1B work visa, or maybe you have a student visa and you traveled out for Hajj and you're coming back now, you absolutely do not have the right to enter the United States, and you have basically no constitutional protections at the border. I like to remind people that if you're coming in on a visa and not a U.S. citizenship and not a lawful permanent resident card, the visa itself only gives you permission to appear at the border. It doesn't guarantee you entry into the border. So it doesn't provide you with very, very many protections at all at the border. It's basically like you have the right to come knock at the border, and then customs can determine whether or not you can enter into the country. And that's even if you left from here to go to Hajj and come back, that's still the case. Your right to reentry is not guaranteed simply because you have a visa. So as we move forward with this presentation, I'll sort of lay out the ways in which the different topics that I'm talking about are different or maybe impacted based on your legal status. So let's move to talk now about what happens at the border. Everybody who travels overseas and comes back has to be inspected at the border. An inspection means they can question you about what countries you've been to, what you're bringing back, and the general purpose for which you were traveling. And when I say general purpose, I mean general purpose. And when you're asked these questions, that's called primary inspection. During primary inspection, you have an obligation to identify yourself, identify what your right to enter is, whether it's because you're a U.S. citizen passport holder, whether it's because you're a lawful permanent resident holder, or whether it's because you're a visa holder. So you have to identify your lawful presence at the border, and you have to provide enough information to CBP to ensure your identity and to ensure that you're not doing something at the border that violates the law. Every person that comes into the United States from overseas has to go through this inspection process. What happens if you identify yourself, you pass over your passport, you answer their questions about where you've been, and they let you in? That means you're free. You can go get your luggage, and you can go through customs with your luggage to make sure you're not importing or bringing anything back with you that's impermissible. But what happens sometimes is some passengers are selected randomly, or because of the way they ask questions, or for many other reasons. They're subjected to what's called secondary screening. Secondary screening usually takes longer, it's more invasive, and you can identify that you've been selected for secondary screening when you are pulled out of line, you're asked to step to the side, someone comes and takes your passport, and they take you to either to the side, they take you sometimes to the luggage carousel, sometimes they take you to a separate room to answer more intensive and more in-depth questions about your travel. So what kind of things do you have to answer at the border? So when I say everybody has to be inspected, that means everybody has to answer questions. You have to provide your identity information. So things that you would normally find on the front page of your passport, your name, your date of birth, your country and place of birth. You also have to answer about where you've been. So I know sometimes when we travel overseas, we might have a layover in a different country. Going to Hajj, sometimes people have a layover in Dubai. So if you've transitioned through Dubai, even if you didn't spend the night there, you're supposed to disclose that you've been to Dubai. So you can say, I was in Dubai and for one day, and then I went to Hajj. I went to Saudi Arabia. So I've been to Saudi Arabia, I've been to Dubai, and then I did the same trip on the way back. You have to identify every country that you've visited on your overseas trip. And some of us, when we go to Hajj, we go from a different country, or we go and visit a different country before we come back home. So it's the same thing. You have to identify all the countries that you've visited on your most recent trip overseas. And then you have to identify, you are required to answer the general purpose of your trip. So the general purpose of your trip, if you're going to Hajj, would be Hajj. I went to Hajj. I went to do the Islamic pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia, and I visited the holy cities. And that's really all you have to answer. Sometimes when you get pulled over in secondary screening, they want to ask you like every city you visited, where you stayed, where you ate, did you meet any people? Those are all questions that you don't necessarily have to answer, especially if you're a U.S. citizen. If you're a U.S. citizen and they're starting to ask you questions about every place that you've stayed, every town that you visited, who you may have spoken to while you were overseas, who you might have spoken to from the United States while you're overseas, you can, as a U.S. citizen, you can respectfully decline to answer those questions. And as a lawful permanent resident, you can respectfully decline to answer those questions, whether it's in primary screening or secondary screening. If you are a visa holder, refusing to answer those types of questions could get you put in removal proceedings, or could get you turned away at the border. So if you get turned away at the border for not answering questions, sometimes it might be better to answer those questions. But as a U.S. citizen, you absolutely have the right to decline answering those questions. So the primary focus of U.S. citizens at the border should be to identify themselves as a U.S. citizen and ask to be let into the country, and the primary focus for lawful permanent residents is to identify yourself and identify that you have a lawful presence in the United States so that you can enter the country, and really only answer the questions that are necessary to provide them with enough information to ensure that you're not doing anything illegal at the border and that your presence at the border is lawful. So there are certain types of questions, if you're a U.S. citizen and a lawful permanent resident, that you absolutely do not have to answer, because it would be a blatant violation of your constitutional rights and those rights that are protected at the border. And those are rights, those are questions related to your religion. We know that Muslims are oftentimes question about their religious practices at the border, including what masjids do you attend, what imams do you follow, what religious texts do you read, does your wife wear hijab, do you attend prayers at the masjid? All of those types of questions are illegal. They are inappropriate. They are not questions for inspection at the border, and you have a right to decline to answer those questions, and you absolutely should decline to answer those questions. They have no legitimate or lawful purpose during an inspection process, and what they're used for is basically just to gather information about our community and see how we're all interconnected. If you're a U.S. citizen and a lawful permanent resident, you have the absolute right to not answer any questions about your politics. And that includes your politics, about how you feel about politics inside the United States and how you feel about politics outside of the United States. We've seen in the past where people coming back from Hajj are being asked about how they feel about Saudi Arabia, how they feel about, if they're from Iran, how they feel about the sanctions in Iran, how they feel about what's going on in Lebanon, how they feel about the U.S. president, not so much under Biden, but that was a question that was frequently asked under Trump to people who are who were returning from overseas. But those are all illegal questions. Political questioning at the border is not part of the approved or appropriate inspection process. And U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents should absolutely refuse to answer those types of questions. The other thing that you can refuse to answer questions about is your social media. If you're a U.S. citizen and a lawful permanent resident, you do not have to tell CBP what your online user profile names are or how to find you on social media. You do not have to answer questions about whether or not you have social media. Those are all inappropriate questions for border screening if you're a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident. However, religious questions about politics, and questions about social media, while they're not appropriate for inspection at the border, if you refuse to answer these questions and you are a visa holder, you can be turned away at the border for refusing to answer those questions. So you should tread a little bit more carefully when you try to answer questions. So what about your right to have an attorney at the border, right? We all hear all of these, quotes. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you and held against you in a court of law, and on and on and on in the criminal context. So do you have a right to an attorney at the border? Well, if you ask CBP, they will say no. However, that is not the case. Some of the rights you have at the border, if you're a U.S. citizen, is you have an absolute right to remain silent. You cannot, once you've identified yourself as a U.S. citizen and you've asked to be paroled into the country or led into the country, you can refuse to answer any other questions, and that goes the same for lawful permanent residents. When it comes to your right to counsel, if you're a U.S. citizen and you're being detained at the border, then you have a right to counsel. There is a little bit of legal ambiguity about when a inspection turns into a detention, and they will oftentimes tell you you do not have the right to have an attorney when you're being inspected, which is true, but you do have the right to have an attorney if it turns into a detention. And what does a detention at the border look like? It looks like they're bringing in plainclothes FBI agents to question you about criminal activity that's not related to your border entry, or ununiformed FBI agents to question you about things that are unrelated to your border crossing, including, your family members overseas, your job here in the United States, how you make money, where you work, where you live, things like that, and people that you're connected to here, or your politics. Also, if you are questioned by FBI agents at all as a U.S. citizen you should say, I'm not going to answer your questions and I'd like you to contact my attorney. And if you are removed from the general area where they question people and you're put in a secure location, that's an indication that you are no longer free to leave and that you are no longer being inspected, and that instead you are actually detained. And at that time, you can invoke your right to counsel. If you are restrained in any manner whatsoever, put in handcuffs, or restrained from leaving a room at that point in time, if you're a U.S. citizen, you should absolutely ask to speak to your attorney. Don't be hindered by the fact that they're going to tell you that you don't have the right to an attorney. Just keep asserting your right. If you stay in detention for more than 3 to 4 hours, or in inspection for more than 3 hours, at that point in time, you can also, probably assume that your inspection has turned into a detention, and that you, at that point in time, you're going to want to start asking to speak with an attorney. So if you are a lawful permanent resident or a green card holder, as they're sometimes called, you can request to see an attorney, but that request can be denied by an officer even if you're in custody, and even if you are being questioned by law enforcement other than CBP, like the FBI or state and local law enforcement. They can deny your right to ask for an attorney, but what they can't deny is your right to remain silent. So you still don't have to answer any questions to the FBI agents or to other law enforcement at that point in time. You can invoke your right to remain silent. You just don't have the right to counsel. If you are a visa holder, you generally don't have any right to counsel at any point during any CBP or FBI interrogation that takes precedent and takes place at the border. However, if you are questioned about things that make you uncomfortable or criminal activity, then you should invoke the right to remain silent. However, doing so, like invoking your right to remain silent, visa holders are always at jeopardy of being turned around at the border and not being allowed to enter, even if they had left here from on a work visa to go to Hajj. So that's something that you need to consider when refusing to answer questions. So what about electronic devices? I know a lot of us travel with a phone, a smartphone nowadays. A lot of us travel with our tablets. Some of us are inevitably going to be traveling with our laptops. So what about electronic devices? What happens to your electronic devices when you cross the border if CBP wants to have them? Well, the fact of the matter is, if CBP asks you to hand them your phone, your laptop, or your tablet, you absolutely must physically hand them your phone. Not handing them your phone is going to cause a problem, and it's going to make the situation more tense because they have an absolute right to inspect your phone. Your phone is considered a container at the border, and they have a right to inspect containers at the border. So you have to physically hand it to them. But what about your password? So when we're traveling with electronic devices, I can tell you that it is very, very important to put a passcode, a unique passcode on your phone. And that would include a numerical password or, alpha, like with the alphabet, or even those little swipe codes, right? Those are all unique. And you can never be compelled, if you're a US citizen, to turn over your passcode to law enforcement. They are now telling people that you have to open your phone, but that's not true. You do not have to open your phone. You do not have to provide a password to them. However, if you have facial recognition on your phone, I know all of these phones have facial recognition now, and it's very convenient. But if you have facial recognition, CBP can actually force you to open your phone utilizing the facial recognition. And the same thing goes with your fingerprint or your thumbprint. They can actually force you to open the phone with your fingerprint or your thumbprint. So if you're using like thumbprint technology for your phone, your laptop, or your tablet, I know my laptop has thumbprint technology, but if you're using it for your electronic devices and you're a US citizen, I would remove that thumbprint and the facial recognition technology off my phone, and I would have a PIN code or an alphanumeric password or a swipe code on my phone if that was me. The other thing is, if you are traveling with electronic devices and you're a US citizen and they want to access your phone, you can tell them, no, I'm not allowing you to access my phone. If you're traveling as a lawful permanent resident, you can also refuse to allow access your phone, but that might cause you problems down the road. However, if you are a visa holder, you absolutely have to let them access your phone and go through your phone. Refusing to do so will very likely get you turned around at the border. The other thing is, if you have to also be aware, if you do refuse access to your phone, they may seize your phone anyways and attempt to obtain a warrant to open your phone based on suspicion that you were hiding something, or to do a data media search, which is something that they've been doing lately. But if your phone is seized at the border and you haven't opened it, we have ways to get it back, and we have ways to try to force them to destroy any data that they illegally accessed off your phone when they have have accessed it without a warrant. So it's better to not allow them. Just to give you sort of an example of why we don't want them to access our phones, what they're looking for a lot of times is your contacts and who you're talking to on like chats like WhatsApp and Signal and social media and things like that. They're trying to see who you're connected to here in the United States and who you're connected to overseas. And we've seen instances where somebody is allowed access to their phone at the border because they don't have anything to hide. And then we see somebody who's in their contact list get stopped at the border next time they travel and say, hey, I found your number in such and such and such and such's phone. How are you connected to them? And now people that you're connected to are getting questioned about you and vice versa. So we don't want to allow law enforcement to unnecessarily profile or map our community in a way that later infringes on the rights of other people. We've also seen where people are pulled over at customs later after allowing access to their phone, and there are questions specifically about content or materials that are found on their phone from the previous time that have nothing to do with their border travel. So it's not, sometimes we do things because we think it'll make it easier for us right now, right? If I give them my phone, I let them look through it, maybe they'll let me go more quickly and I'll have less problems. But what we realize is in the end, we've actually set ourselves up for more problems in the future as opposed to like solving our issue now. I always tell people this when I give Know Your Rights presentations, but my mom used to tell me that it's always easier to say no from the beginning than it is to stop doing something that you've already agreed to. Because if you've already agreed to do something, the first time you say no, it's going to be a bigger problem. They're going to be more aggressive with you. They're going to try to hold you longer, to try to compel you to do something that you didn't want to do. And had you said no from the first time, they would know that dealing with you is going to kind of be a hassle and they're not going to maybe want to put themselves through it to get no useful information. So that's something to keep in mind when we're crossing the border. We have rights for a reason and we should be exercising those rights. And the reason we have rights is to protect us explicitly from unnecessary interference with law enforcement and profiling from law enforcement. The Bill of Rights, the majority of it, deals with being U.S. citizens being protected from law enforcement, like overreaching and harming us in a way. And so we should be utilizing those rights to protect ourselves because that's what they're there for. So, turning your phone over may seem like the easiest thing to do, but it's eroding your own rights and causing you and possibly people that you're connected to later down the road. So while but they try to trick you and they will tell you that you have to turn your passwords over, and that's just not the case. So some tips for how we can protect our information when we're traveling. I mean, back into the United States. I mean, I carry literally all my information on my cell phone, all my contacts, pictures, private information in my emails, everything that you can think of is on my electronic devices, either on my computer, my tablet, or my phone. So it's important we want to protect those informations. So some things you should consider before leaving to Hajj. Is it possible for you to travel to Hajj with a temporary phone or a phone that doesn't have all of the information from your entire life history on it, but really only has those most important contacts that you may need while you're overseas? If it is possible, consider traveling with a spare phone that doesn't have all of that information. Consider when you're traveling overseas, consider everything that you have that's cloud-based, sign out of it. If you have like Gmail, you can sign out of your Gmail accounts and back up your contacts and sign out, and then all of that information is not there. You should definitely be disabling fingerprint access and facial recognition access to the phone. When you're traveling back in, you should definitely sign out of social media and other cloud-based storages, because even if CBP accesses your phone, they generally can only access the actual contents of your phone. They can't force you to sign back into your social media. They can't access your cloud-based storage without a warrant, because that's one step farther than just inspecting your phone. So if you want to protect that type of private information that we keep, put it in a cloud-based storage and then sign out of the cloud and don't have it available and ready on the phone. And then make sure you back up all your files and documents that you have on the phone, because if they do confiscate your phone at the border, you're going to want to have access to your contacts, your documents, and everything else that is stored on your phone. If you are a week or 2 weeks or what have you without that electronic device. So those are some tips about traveling with our electronic devices. So sometimes what happens, and we've seen this with lawful permanent residents, is when lawful permanent residents return to the United States and they get selected for secondary screening and they're kind of having a difficult time, they're asked to sign some documentation. You should never, ever sign anything without an attorney reading it, especially at the border, especially if you have an immigration status here. Because what has happened in the past is that immigrants are being asked to sign what's called a Form 407. That form voluntarily relinquishes your rights to your lawful permanent resident card or your green card. So it means that you are no longer a lawful permanent resident. Like, you've basically given it up. And at that point in time, they can put you in they can hold you in custody and put you in removal proceedings and try to send you back to whatever country that you migrated from previously. And they're doing it basically with your consent because you've voluntarily done it. And how this happens is sometimes they'll tell you, like, if you're having a difficult time, they'll tell you, if you sign this paperwork, we'll let you go. So, you sign the paperwork, you don't really read it. Maybe you read it, you don't understand it. And in the end, you have actually accidentally signed away your rights to your immigration status. And then if that happens, you have to start back over. You have to start with a new application. And we know how long it is sometimes for people's applications to be processed from certain countries. So that's something that you don't have to go through, and they cannot force you to sign any documents at the border. So just keep that in mind. There's no documents that you have to sign at the border in order to be let in. So don't sign anything at the border if you're a green card holder. If you are a non-immigrant visa holder, for instance, if you are like a H-1B visa, a student visa, or any other type of visa returning from Hajj, and it looks like they are not going to let you back in the country, at that point in time, what you should do is you should withdraw your request for admission, which means you are removing your request to be let into the country at that time. That is not the same as turning over your visa. It's not the same as signing away your rights to your visa. It's just like, hey, you know what? You might not let me in, so I'm going to go back to either my home country or the country that I just came from. If they'll let you back in, and then you can try again on a different day to re-enter. If they refuse you entry into the United States instead of withdrawing your request for admission, they could give you a removal order, which means that they are removing you from the United States, which could cause you problems with your non-immigrant visa. If you are coming from a country, if you're a non-immigrant visa holder, and you have some visa status other than lawful permanent resident, but you're from a country that you're afraid to go back to, and it looks like they're not going to let you back in the United States, at that time you should tell them that you fear persecution if you return, and you should ask to be let in under an application for refugee status or asylum status at that point in time. Not refugee status, but asylum status. And that's if you have a credible fear of risk of harm if you're forced to return to the country that you originally immigrated from. That's not Saudi Arabia, but whatever your home country is. Something else that you can do that's very important when you're returning from Hajj is you have somebody here at whatever airport that you're entering from, whether it's in New York or Chicago or Dulles or Michigan. I'm not sure if there are any flights coming directly from Michigan or not. I don't think so, but you should have somebody who knows what your travel plans are. They should know exactly what time your plane is expected to land, and they should be on standby. And it's got to be somebody that you know is reliable to be able to be in contact with you at that point in time. So you should give your friend or family member your itinerary. And then when you land in the United States, before you disembark on the plane, you should text message them to let them know that you've landed. And you should tell them, if I don't contact you within 2 or 2.5 hours, you should contact an attorney, or you can contact CAIR Michigan or the CAIR chapter in the state where you've landed. And then we can start inquiring with you about the border. Most of the time when you come through customs, you should be done with 1 hour or 2 hours. If it's been more than 2 hours, it looks like you might be in secondary screening. at that time. And if it goes on more than 4 hours, then that's a pretty good indication that you are definitely in secondary screening and having some difficulties getting back in. So if you're a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident, you should definitely have somebody on standby, and you should definitely give them information for either an immigration attorney or CAIR chapter that can help you if you have difficulties at the border. Most of the places where people are flying from, there are CAIR chapters that would be available to assist should there be an issue at the border. The other thing that you should do, and this is my last point, and then I'll kind of summarize what we went over today, but you should consider having a form. It's called the G28 form. A G28 form is technically an immigration form, but a G28 form is the form that is a notice of appearance of a retained attorney. And you can sign a G28 form before you leave for Hajj, and you can leave it with somebody. They can leave the information about the attorney blank. That way, if you come back into the United States and you're having a difficult time, you have a notice of representation that they can take to an attorney. The attorney can fill out their portion, and then they can start inquiring about you at the border. And the G28 is the only form that Customs recognizes as being from an attorney, that would authorize an attorney to speak on your behalf. The other form that you need to fill out is a DS-590. That's DS, Department of State 590. That's an authorization to release information. It's a Department of Homeland Security form. And you take that form along with the G28, and an attorney will be able to talk to people at CBP. If you're a U.S. citizen, they'll be able to talk to people at CBP to find out your status and get information released about you, and try to work to get you released if you're being detained for a long period of time. So that's kind of the steps that you should take if you are traveling for Hajj. It's important to remember some key aspects. If you are a U.S. citizen, the only thing you have to do at the border is to identify yourself as a U.S. citizen and provide enough information to verify that your U.S. citizenship, including your U.S. passport, answer questions about the purpose of your travel, and answer questions about all the countries that you've been. You don't have to you don't have to open your electronic devices or turn over any passwords to any electronic devices, and they have to let you in the country. If you're a lawful permanent resident, you have to provide enough information to identify your legal status in the United States and your identity, provide the purpose of your travel, answer questions about where you've been, every country that you've been to on your most recent travel, answer questions about what you may or may not be bringing back with you into the country, fish, cheese, money, all of those questions. But you may not have the right to an attorney at the border the same way that a U.S. citizen would if they're being detained and questioned by law enforcement, but you can definitely assert your right to remain silent. And if you're a visa holder that's other than a lawful permanent resident holder, you have very much less rights at the border, and you have to be very strategic about the types of questions and the types that you're going to answer and the types of questions you're not going to answer. And you have to answer more intrusive and more invasive questions because of the nature of your status entering the United States. And you also have to open your cell phones for them, but you do not have to provide any information about your contact information in the phone, but you do have to. They may ask to see your social media, but you do not have to provide those social media passwords. So inshallah, I hope all of our Hujjaj go to Hajj and they come back safely. May Allah accept it from you. Keep CAIR Michigan in your du'as, inshallah.
Thank you very much, Sister Amy, for that valuable presentation and information. I'm going to add on a couple of other points because Sister Amy talked about your rights as a U.S. citizen and traveling. I want to make a couple of points regarding you actually being in Saudi Arabia. We've had 2 incidences within the past year, including 1 Michigan resident, and then last year, and then within the past month and a half, 3 American citizens in another state who've been detained by the Saudis, making the lesser pilgrimage or Umrah. In one particular case, it was related to political speech or offensive speech. Another case, there were 3 Americans who were just picked up without making any speech, but perhaps it was with individuals they met with while they were in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So,
I think Brother Dawood.
yeah, sorry, I hit the wrong button. So I just hit the number to a link to the consulate in Jeddah. So number one, inform your family members that if you are traveling and if they don't hear from you from a period, let's say at least like 36 hours, I would say, there's a number that you can contact the U.S. consulate in Jeddah. And notice there's a difference between the U.S. embassy, which is in Riyadh, and the U.S. consulate in Jeddah. Jeddah is the closest area of Saudi Arabia, and it's actually the embarkment point of where pilgrims come in to Saudi Arabia, right? Or the Hujjaj. Contact the embassy and let them know that you have your loved one who went there on Hajj. You should also have the hotel information, by the way, the hotel information of where your loved ones are staying at in Medina and in Mecca, and give them your name, their name, if you have not heard from them, and the hotel that they were staying at. Perhaps they are hospitalized and you don't know it, and they lost their phone. Perhaps they're being detained. But if you do not hear from your loved ones, also it may be a good idea for those who are comfortable with iPhones to have your location finder put on your phone when you're there, so that your loved ones, your spouse, or one of your children can actually see where you're at. And actually, when I was there in December, I actually did that with my family. When my son and I went, I actually did that with one of my family members who was able to track my steps, if you are comfortable with that. In saying that, going back to the first case, understand that the First Amendment does not apply to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, right? It doesn't apply for its citizens, nor does it apply for you as a Haji or a Hajjah. So rethink making any speech that's political in nature, that is critical of anything going on in the Middle East, in particular the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and or criticizing its crown prince, its king, or its grand mufti while you are in Saudi Arabia. If that is heard by the authorities that are outward, or a jasus, or someone who's working for intelligence, you may be detained, as what took place to that brother in Melvindale, who was held for about a month in Saudi Arabia. Number two, also be careful of who you are meeting with. Perhaps the intelligence agencies are tracking someone that you are meeting with from another country, and you may be detained in regards to that. If it's an incident of your family member being detained and they are not released, you cannot get any information from the U.S. consulate, then contact CAIR Michigan, and we can reach out to the U.S. consulate or even to the Saudi government on your behalf. And this has happened on more than one occasion. Actually, years ago, one of the Qazwinis was actually detained and actually beaten by the Saudi religious police, and we had to literally contact the embassy and issue a public release. And upon that public release, the Sayyid Qazwini was released from the not Hassan Qazwini, one of the other Qazwinis, was released from being detained, right? So just understand that as your rights are diminished as an American citizen coming back across into America, you don't really have rights. You're at the whims of the Saudi regime. So please keep that in mind when you're traveling. And as Sister Amy said, we sincerely ask you while you are in Medina to make a dua for us when you give your salam to our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We ask that Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts your ziyarah to Al-Habib al-Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam, accepts your umrah before your Hajj Tamatu, accept your Hajj, all of your dua, accept your qurbani or your udhiyah, your ritual sacrifice, all of the sadaqah that you give to the khuddam, to those workers who are serving by cleaning up El Masjid Nabawi and El Masjid Haram, he accepts all of that sadaqah that you give to those servants. I actually encourage you to give sadaqah to those servants who are serving and cleaning at the holy places. Very honorable job to have. And please follow Sister Amy's advice in regards to that very valuable information. And we thank you very much for tuning in. Is there anything you'd like to add, Sister Amy, before we conclude?
I don't think so, inshallah. I think that covers it.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. And please go to CAIR-Michigan.org and sign up for our e-updates. You can also see our latest civil rights report that is on our website. And we also have the link in which you can give a secure donation. And with that, we conclude, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you all a blessed Jummah night tonight and a blessed Jummah day tomorrow. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان في خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.